Hi, I'm Anne. Welcome back to my video. And gosh, I look very pink. I'm not sure why the screen is doing that, but today we're going to be talking about The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. So we are currently, when you watch this, we're going to be in the third week of Around the World in 80 Days. I should be in Italy currently, but I just finished in France. I actually finished it Saturday, but I haven't been able to get a video out. So I read Alexandre Dumas's The Count of Monte Cristo set in France for the prompt that says, read a book set in France. So this was the book, and I probably, in retrospect, should have chosen a shorter book. This book was in total about 1,200 pages, which was quite a bit. And I ended up taking about a week and a half to read it instead of taking a week, which, like, at first I was kind of, bashing myself for saying, oh, it took you a week and a half to read this instead of a week like it was supposed to take you. But then I'm like, when I read like 1,200 page books before, they took me months to read. Like, I remember War and Peace took me about 3 months to read. So to read this in a week and a half is an accomplishment. And since I only read one book set in France, unlike my previous video where I talked about, I think, 4 books that were set in England, I only have one this week. And I will probably only have one next week, though that video will be coming out probably Wednesday because I'm already over halfway done with The Betrothed by Alexander Manzoni. So that one is a much lighter read. It's crazy to think like, oh, 700 pages. This is so light compared to The Count of Monte Cristo at 1,200 pages, when I realized that, yeah, 700 pages is still a very long book. But I decided to, instead of spending like more time and going over, into the week of Egypt. I believe that is the next country. Instead of that, I would just read the one book set in Italy, and then I would be caught up. Let's talk about the Count of Monte Cristo. I'm not going to keep holding it up. I have no idea if that's going to stay up, but boy, that looks cool. So, what is this book about? This book follows Edmond Dantes. He is an up-and-coming sailor. He's about to be a captain of a ship. He's engaged to Mercedes, as in the car. He is engaged to this young woman, Mercedes. He's 19 years old. He's just up and coming in life. And what happens is that he has several men who are jealous of him and his success. So one of the men wants to marry Mercedes, and she is, of course, in love with Edmund. And another of the men wants to be captain of the ship that Edmond Dantes is becoming captain of, and is jealous of him. So you have several characters who want to see Edmund fail. And you also have a magistrate, the guy who judges Edmund, who is also trying to cover up some stuff. So you have a few people who end up putting a crime on Edmond Dantes that he did not commit. And he gets sentenced to basically banishment on this island prison. And so that is, I would say, the first big chunk of the book. And of course, he survives. To get into less spoilers, he survives. He decides to seek revenge on all those who destroyed his life. I ended up overall giving it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So it is very much a challenging book to read. You have the small array of characters that are either tied to Edmond Dantes, like Mercedes, like Edmund's father, but then you also have the people who destroyed his life. And, you have like 4 or 5 characters in that zone. So those are really the only characters that you meet in the beginning of the book. And throughout the first 24% of the book, something like that, the first fourth of the book, you really only get to meet maybe 1 or 2 main other characters. You don't really see many characters. But then when you hit that like quarter mark, you start being introduced to a lot more characters. And it was a lot for me to keep track of because all of these younger generation especially were tied to the people in Edmund's past. So you have a lot of characters to keep track of in the later half of the book that you don't really have in the first half of the book. So that is something that I struggled with, and I can see a lot of modern readers struggling with. Now, I feel like the biggest question of reading a book this size is, does it warrant the length? This is a 1,200 page book, and there are quite a few books that I personally don't think warrant their length. A good example is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, which I read at the end of last year. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I just thought that it could have been shortened a lot. And some books, I would argue, I personally wouldn't shorten. Les Mis by Victor Hugo is one that is also about 1,000 pages, 1,100 pages, and that one I would think would lose something if you took out certain aspects of it. So I would say certain books you can cut down a lot. And that's one of my first questions I think I want to answer when reading very long books, because I want to tell everyone whether it is worth your time to read a long book, that long a book. Because it's one thing for me to recommend a 300-page book, because that's relatively easy to read. But for me to have to recommend reading a 1,200-page book, that's a little bit different. No, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this book for everyone to read. I don't think it has quite the same depth that, say, a book like War and Peace has, or Les Mis is a great one, or any of Charles Dickens' longer books. I would probably recommend them before I would recommend this. And I think it comes down to some of the ideas and themes that are expressed in this book. The number one theme that is expressed in this book is the idea that revenge is not necessarily a good thing, that it won't lead to happiness, that it will lead to misery for basically every party involved. And there's nothing wrong with that theme. In fact, I enjoyed the theme. But when it is bashed on your head for a 1,200-page book, it can become a little bit too much. Unnecessary repetition of this theme. You know, you have several characters near the beginning that say to Edmund, hey, don't let yourself be consumed by this idea of revenge. He is imprisoned on this island for 14 years before he is able to escape. And he is able to stew in his thoughts and realize that some of his closest friends betrayed him. And he is able to live with that for over a decade. And when you do that, sometimes it's very hard to get out of that headspace of blame and this deep hatred. And he is able to kind of see that by the end of the book, especially when it comes to the younger generation. So he's in prison for 14 years, then he discovers a treasure and becomes wealthy, maybe in the next, I'd say 5 or 6 years. So it's like 20 some years later that he actually returns to Paris, actually returns to his family. Woo, the color just changed a lot. I don't know why, but it's cool now. Something's wrong with my camera. So basically you have this vast period of time that's changed, and because of that, you have a lot of the main characters who brought about his demise, in a sense, being now fathers and mothers. Mercedes has gotten married to the man that wanted to marry her in the beginning that betrayed Edmund without her knowing that he betrayed Edmund, obviously. And she has a son who is now maybe 19 or 20. He's about the age that Edmond Dantes was at the beginning of the book, this idealist young man. You also have children of several other of the characters that betrayed him. So you have a wide array of the younger generation as well, that Edmund realizes, by me actually seeking revenge about their parents, I am not only destroying these small lives of the people who betrayed me, I'm destroying the lives of this younger generation who is innocent, who did not do anything wrong, who did not try to harm me. And so he realizes that at the end of the book, but it is too late for him to rectify his revenge that he has set up throughout the book. And so he is kind of only able to make some arrangements to make the young people as happy as possible and give them a future, while also not being able to fix his mistakes. And in a sense, though, the book is contradictory in its theme of revenge, because on one sense, yes, you do have revenge being a bad thing. It's shown. But then you also have this sense of gratification. Maybe this is my sick twisted mind. You have this sense of gratification when certain people get their comeuppance. And definitely, I think that the reality of how certain stories ends and how they get their comeuppance is just too bad sometimes. But sometimes I'm like, yeah, they kind of deserve that. So I was in the middle of the revenge theme, because sometimes I felt like Dumas was actually saying revenge is fine as long as you don't go beyond a certain amount. And so I was in the middle of the theme of revenge. But besides that main theme of revenge, and yes, you have some like lesser themes, the theme of love, loss, things like that, you don't really have a very prominent theme and a lot of different complexity outside of that one theme. And that's what I thought was lacking in this book that other long books like Les Mis, like War and Peace, have, because in those books they examine a wide array of characters, a wide array of ideas, and this one kind of just felt like it examined one idea over and over again, and I wanted more. I wanted more depth in like the complexities of the characters and understanding different elements of society, and kind of doing commentary on different parts of society and different aspects of stuff, and I just wish there was a little bit more there. And so that's why I don't think this book would be for everyone to read, because it is a big commitment to try to read a 1,200 page book. So that is the one book that I read for set in France. I enjoyed it. I really liked it, and I'm glad to get this off like my TBR, because this has been a book that I've wanted to read for years, and it's also made me like feel so much more optimistic about getting my physical TBR done, because if I can tackle a book that is like 1,200 pages in a week and a half, what can I not tackle? So I'm curious, have you read The Count of Monte Cristo? What are some of your favorite books that are set in France? Have you read any of these other big like books, whether it's French books like Victor Hugo's Les Mis, or other like very big classics that are like 1,000+ pages? Do you think a lot of them warrant their length, or do you basically think that all of them need to have been cut down just a little bit? Because quite a few of them I think could have been cut down 100, 200, 300+ pages, and nothing would be lost. But I'm curious to know what you think. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and continuing on this adventure of around the world in 80 days. And we are going to Italy now. And I will see you all in the next video. Ooh.